listening to The Voice of Russia in London. My name is Brendan Cole. Now, George Bush wasn't exactly a popular American president, but even his ratings would be the envy of France's President Francois Hollandes. His approval rating has plummeted to 13%. That's just over 1 in 10 French people think he is doing an adequate job. His socialist government policies have been a failure. Economic growth in the first 2 years of his presidency has been only 0.8%, and unemployment is even worse. It has swelled 15% to 3.3 million. Even his punitive tax on the super-rich seemed to do little more than lead to an exodus of showbiz stars and footballers, and a less than successful European parliamentary elections ensued, his socialists winning roughly only half as many seats as the National Front. Maybe to take his mind off matters, he has undertaken a rather hawkish foreign policy. He visited Iraq this month and has pledged military support to fight the Islamic State. Indeed, a tough response to Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb has signalled a no-nonsense approach that some say he hopes to draw attention away from domestic failings. Speaking of domestic matters, the country has been captivated by a less than flattering memoir by his former partner about her time as the former French First Lady. So what does this mean for the office of the French President? Can he last until his term expires in 2017? And what next for this great nation, which is seeing a resurgence in the far right as it capitalises on this vacuum left by a socialist party in disarray? Well, to discuss this, I'm joined in the studio by Patrick Marnham. He writes for The Spectator in France and was the former Paris correspondent of the Independent newspaper. Also here is Nicolas Sarkozy, a lecturer in French politics at Bath University, and Bénédicte Paviot, who is the London correspondent for France 24, the French and English versions. On the line, we have Erwan Lenon, who's a business consultant and editor of the portal Trop Libre. Warm welcome to you all. Very interested in your view. Nicolas Sarkozy has relaunched his prospects for the presidency in 2017. Bénédicte, what did you make of what he had to say? He had a rousing rally in Lille, didn't he?
He did indeed, and it seems that what has been retained by the French media is first that he was extremely moved to be, well, almost politically alive again, if you want. It is definitely a long-awaited comeback in the sense that he's really never been out of the equation. I mean, these constant rumours, is he, won't he, etc. But what we should point out is that it seems that he has had to come back earlier than he would have wished to do. He had hoped to do this next year, and there are a number of reasons probably why he has come back now. One is that he's had a number of legal problems that are hanging around him, all kinds of accusations to do with political corruption, money obtaining, financing of his political campaign, etc. All of, I should say, that he denies vigorously. But also, there is the small matter at a time when you have a French president who, as you correctly stated in your introduction, is beating all records of popularity or unpopularity. You would think that the right wing, the Conservatives, would do everything they can to get their ducks in a row. They haven't. They are completely split. They're at the moment, there's this incredible political infighting, backbiting, and they are at the moment being led by 3 former French prime ministers. So Sarkozy is going for it. But the principal message that the French media have retained today, I see, is the fact that he is now saying that France should go for the gaz de schiste, so for fracking, which actually he helped to pass a law while he was president, is illegal in France.
Indeed, and so he's capitalising, it sounds like, on the disarray of the Hollande presidency. Erwan, I'll turn to you. I mean, just why has it gone so wrong for Francois Hollande? 13%, it's very difficult to think of any Western leader with ratings quite so low in such a short period of time.
But I think that François Hollande was elected first because the French people didn't want Sarkozy anymore, and second because he was promising that he would change the country, that it would be a new start. And actually, he's been trying his policy for 2 years, and as you said, it's been a complete failure. So in last April, he changed the prime minister and turned to Manuel Valls, who's defending a more, I would say, right-wing ideology within the socialist left, but who's actually in minority within his own party. So it's being pretty hard for him. So I think we have here the juxtaposition of two facts and two trends. First, that the French people do not trust Hollande anymore because he didn't deliver, and second, because he has betrayed his promises that he made during the French presidential campaign in 2012.
I guess that's the problem, isn't it, Patrick? I mean, can a socialist government that's committed to austerity measures really still be called socialist?
It's a problem for his own party in the National Assembly, who are determined to keep it as a socialist government, and he ran, of course, on the socialist ticket in 2012. But he's been forced to abandon those policies by their failure and their unpopularity. And as long as he doesn't lose a vote of confidence, I think there are now about 30 members of his own party who have describe themselves as frondeurs, who are still determined to try and change policy back to the left. As long as he can survive any votes of confidence by them abstaining rather than opposing him, I think he's going to be all right as far as lasting out his term goes.
Of course, that's to do with the government, because the president is elected for a 5-year term, and unless he actually resigns, he will be there for the duration. What may happen is that if his prime minister or a future prime minister that he has asked to lead the government loses a motion of confidence, then if the government falls, he would then call parliamentary elections.
So, Nicolas, I mean, if he came up on a wave of a sentiment against Sarkozy, anti-Sarkozy sentiment, which seems partially true, I mean, how many of his promises have been broken? I mean, has Francois Hollande taken a completely different economic tact, and the French people just simply aren't used to it?
Well, I think it's very, very difficult for Francois Hollande. I mean, he came to power saying that he would reduce unemployment. That was one of his key
and it's gone up to 3.3 million.
And I think more or less every month since he's become president, the level of unemployment in France has risen, including the kind of vexed question of youth unemployment, which doesn't seem to go away. There are more than a quarter of young people without work in France under the age of 25. And I think, if you're a socialist a socialist president, then these are the kind of issues that help get you elected. And if you're seen not to respond to those issues, then I think your popularity will plummet fairly quickly. I mean, there are other issues, aren't there? There are issues surrounding, his overall performance. Does he have the charisma that we expect of a French president in modern day politics? He certainly doesn't seem to have that kind of ability to connect with the electorate that perhaps previous presidents have had, or perhaps, dare say, Marine Le Pen may have. I think there are a number of factors, but I think it's going to be very difficult for him. But I agree with our other panellists. I think it's highly unlikely that he doesn't see out the 5-year term. The French political system is set up that your president serves his term of office, and the fall guys are likely to be the various prime ministers and governments that may emerge.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. My name is Brendan Cole. We're discussing the French political scene. With me is Patrick Marnham, who writes for The Spectator on France, and he was the former Paris correspondent of The Independent. Dr. Nicolas Sarkozy, a French political lecturer at Bath University. Bénédicte Paviot, who is the London correspondent for France 24. And on the line, Erwan Lenot, a business consultant and editor of Trop Libre. So Bénédicte, what is he banking on? I mean, 2017 is a long way away. Is he just going to hope that, even with 13% approval ratings, that the economy just gets better? I mean, would the public forgive him, perhaps for some of his shortcomings in the first 2 years of his presidency, if the economy picked up?
He is definitely banking on the economy getting better. I think that the very latest figures for the last month on unemployment finally have gone the other way. That would be a first, but that's taken 2.5 years, which is supremely bad news, since that was his main priority. As you also mentioned in your introduction, completely pertinent to this is the fact that he seems to have a much clearer vision that is understood and appreciated by the French electorate, all parties now I'm referring to, on his foreign policy than on his domestic policy. We'll put aside the domestic in the sense of the domestic problems that he's had, which have not helped. One cannot emphasize enough the fact that you have a woman who is your partner in life, who happens to be a political journalist, who still thinks she can be a political journalist when she's First Lady, although in France we don't really have First Ladies, who then sends a tweet that is actually very tacitly critical and encouraging the opponent of your partner who you had 4 children with, i.e. the former presidential unsuccessful candidate Ségolène Royal. All those things have, you also alluded to, affected his image and la présidence, the presidency. So what was fascinating about the exercise we saw on Thursday, the over 2-hour press conference that we witnessed, both French journalists and international media, he began with a 42-minute statement. And what he did throughout the entire press conference is that he put himself back, and that really is the word, in a role of president. He suddenly tried to take a distance himself from his government. In other words, I've appointed a prime minister, Manuel Valls, who's already on his second government, and he will be implementing the policies, economic, etc., etc. But French media itself was very critical afterwards about the fact that it lacked a proper vision. What they recognized was this was a man saying, I'm the president, I will step in as and when necessary. I'm obviously watching carefully, and these are my policies. But there's no doubt that his personal image and that of the presidency has been affected. I would just finish with one line. Personally, I believe that President Sarkozy marked a watershed in French presidencies because he helloified, so to speak, the French presidency by allowing Carla Bruni Sarkozy to pose on the roof of the Élysée Palace. He also tried to be his own prime minister in his own government. And that is one of the reasons I've sometimes compared him to Marmite. The French people had a love-hate relationship with him, and they have an epidemic reaction to him. So what his prospects are for him coming back and being appreciated, understood, and when he says he's changed, I don't think the French media sees much change in Mr. Sarkozy.
Well, did you see any change, Elwan? I mean, do you think there was a more humble, perhaps, Sarkozy away from the bling-bling that perhaps some of the French public were quite sick of?
Well, actually, Sarkozy came back in 3 steps. So first he wrote a letter that was published on Facebook. Then he gave a TV interview on Sunday night that was, everyone agrees that it was quite a failure. And he made a speech yesterday night in Lille, as you said, in a meeting with UMP supporters. Sarkozy I think that he's not really preoccupied by what the French people think of him for the moment, because the challenge for him is to be elected president of his own political family and his own political party, the UMP, and he's going to be elected by a huge margin because the UMP supporters just love him. So I think that Sarkozy is coming back in different steps, and for the moment, he's not turning to the French people, really. He's just, in Lille, he gave a speech that was, at the beginning, addressed to the UMP supporters, and then he gave quite a view of what he would do as a president, but it's still quite vague. And I think it's not yet in the presidential campaign, really. And he will, when he will turn to the presidential campaign, he will have to address what Benedict said, that is, that the French people do not love him, that they have really no illusion of about him and about what he would do as a president again. His main challenge after the UMP will be Marine Le Pen, actually.
And we'll touch on Marine Le Pen, but just on the UMP question, Patrick, I suppose a lot of people would be feeling that the UMP should be capitalising more on Francois Hollande's woes, and they're not. And this is where Sarkozy could actually be a good fit.
Yes, I'm not sure I entirely agree with Erwin about his popularity in the UMP. He's always been wonderful in big meetings, but there are a lot of members of the UMP who are very, very angry about the on-running scandal about the financing of Sarkozy's last election campaign. And his opponents within the party, that's to say Juppé, François Fillon and Bruno Le Maire, are all emphasizing that this could become a terrible problem for the UMP unless it's settled, and that Sarkozy is not the man to preside over the party while it's being settled. There aren't even charges yet, but there will be shortly. And Sarkozy may be directly implicated in it. So I wouldn't say that he's got such a clear run to candidacy as some people think.
I suppose, this side of the English Channel, Nicolas, seeing that Copé named in a police probe into overspending, we're talking about millions of pounds of invoices forged, which we had our own expenses scandal in the UK, but that seems like small beer compared to this. I mean, is there a feeling that people in France feel that French politics is broken?
Well, perhaps to an extent, but I don't think we should necessarily exaggerate, because, political corruption in France has been somewhat systemic over the last 20 years or so.
So people just accept it?
I'm not saying that people accept it, but it's, if you think about what's happened in the last few years, we've seen the situation with Dominique Strauss-Kahn, we've seen the situation within the UMP, we've seen the situation with Chirac when he was president and formerly mayor of Paris. Political corruption, particularly financial scandal, seems to be at the very root of all this. And how damaging is it? I'm not sure. We've also seen the Kozak affair for the left, for the Socialist Party, which has not been helpful for them. I guess the one beneficiary of all this is Marine Le Pen, because she's trying to portray herself as something different. It may well be that the FN has had its own scandals. It has indeed. But the fact that it has not been a parliamentary party of significance or had a serving president has in effect meant that it's able to disentangle itself from the tainting of political corruption that is associated with the two main blocs on the left, the Parti Socialiste, and on the right, the centre-right UMP. I think it's one of the tactics that the Front National, as they kind of energise and modernise, will seek to exploit as we go up to 2017.
Benedict, what about the relationship that the French public have with the president, and has that changed since Chirac? Sarkozy, you called him a Marmite president. People either loved them or they hated him. But do they put their president on a pedestal and perhaps feel more personally aggrieved when they don't deliver in the way that Francois Hollande has, perhaps?
There is an aura, or has been, a very great aura. Above all, a French president is the foreign policy leader, a bit like President Obama. He, is the commander-in-chief. And until Jacques Chirac, it is generally acknowledged that there was that distance, an aura about a president, and you intervened, not all the time, but as and when. You did the official functions, and then it was very formal. There was a much more formal... You could say that's also generational. These were people who knew the last war. And of course, President Sarkozy was the first, if I'm correct. I think I am. Who wasn't part of that generation. But it also, what happened with President Sarkozy is that he wanted the good stories to be published about him. So he was the one very happy with the Hello magazine spread with him and Carla, we're at home, and all that kind of a la almost JFK, Kennedy, Jackie, Kennedy sort of thing. But he never wanted the bad stories, and he obviously has a problem understanding that in this 21st century world, the internet was less prevalent with him. Now with President Hollandes, who's just been caught, a few months ago on a motorbike. What is all that about? That you think you can sneak out of the Elysee, with a macaroon, with a special sticker on the front of your motorbike that is clearly presidential, without mentioning even the security implications. But it's all very French, because you get your security guard in the morning to take you croissant to you and your mistress. So, it really makes a mockery. So I think that the French prefer their president in that commander-in-chief role. Now, President Hollande is not at all the way. One word has not been mentioned with him and with his name. He campaigned, understanding how French people were reacting against Sarkozy. He cleverly, whether of himself or his advisors, his spin doctors, whatever, French presidents have them too. When he was the candidate, he said, I will be le président normal. I will be the normal president. In other words, I will not be bling-bling. I will not be interventionist. I will let my government do what it needs to do. I will take a car as opposed, and we'll just play everything down. Yes, he's been far less interventionist, but it has lacked drive. It has lacked clarity. It has lacked strength. And that is why, apart from the bad economic figures and the strong foreign policy, I think he's in trouble.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. My name is Brendan Cole. We're discussing the French political scene. With me is Patrick Marnham, who writes for The Spectator on France, and he was the former Paris correspondent of The Independent. Dr. Nicolas Sarkozy, a French political lecturer at Bath University. Bénédicte Paviot, who is the London correspondent for France 24. And on the line, Erwan Lenot, a business consultant and editor of Trop Libre. Oh, and I guess the point Benedict made there actually was that here you had Mr. Sarkozy volunteering to appear in Paris Match, his successor appearing in Paris Match, but not so voluntarily in this book published by his former partner. What kind of impact did those revelations have? Because he seemed to have some rather disparaging things to say about the poor, and that can't go down well, can it?
It's been quite ambiguous because many people have said and thought that it was what Mrs. Trierweiler did was not acceptable, and it was quite weird to have all this private stuff in a book and sell to everyone. And on the other hand, I think that the book was all sold in 2 or 3 days, and Mrs. Trierweiler has become a millionaire in just 2 or 3 weeks because everyone is buying the book. You can even have it free on the internet because everyone is sharing it and trying to read it. So it's maybe it's because of Sarkozy, who made the president quite a TV star and some showbiz star, but the French people are quite ambiguous in the end because they do both things at the same time. They criticize Trierweiler and they buy the book.
So this could be a change in. I guess French leaders have had a history of keeping their private lives private, and at least journalists not prying into their private lives. That has really changed, hasn't it?
It has changed because maybe also because of Marine Le Pen, because Marine Le Pen has been denouncing like a kind of mafia of journalists and political people who all live together and do not say it, and it's all in the back rooms. But I think that in the end, Mrs. Trierweiler's book do not have a lot of influence on what the French people think of President Francois Hollande, because the French do not have any moral illusion and neither any hope in Francois Hollande's presidency. If you go on the French markets and if you go in the streets, people do not talk about Francois Hollande. They just do not care about him. It's kind of weird, but they talk about the Prime Minister Manuel Valls. They talk about the economic Minister of Economy Emmanuel Macron, but they do not talk of Francois Hollande. I think he has somehow disappeared of the French political life.
Interesting. Patrick, we've referred to Marine Le Pen a few times, and let's tackle what her vision is. Has she managed to reinvent and transform the National Front from the party of her father, and has she done it effectively?
Hugely effectively. She's a far more attractive character in public. She's, in my opinion, she's a great deal more intelligent than her father and a much cleverer political operator. And she has frequently condemned, for instance, anti-Semitic associations with the National Front, speaking as leader, even though she obviously has anti-Semitic supporters. And she's just a wonderful political infighter. And she has also latched on to the issues which upset so many voters, to do with immigration and crime. Recently, an opinion poll gave it that the only two people likely to get in, any person likely to get into the second round at this stage, is way out, of course, 2 years away from the presidential election, would be Marine Le Pen, who would defeat Hollande in the second round. I don't think that's going to happen, but it shows the strength of her current position. But may I just say something about the previous points you were making there about Hollande, Hollande's the way he's embarrassed himself in his country with his private life. In a way, I think we've slightly moved away from that now. We're talking on the day after the murder of Hervé Gordel in Algeria, and after President Hollande has committed France to join in the military intervention in Iraq. And I think in a way that the last time, the one thing Hollande has done in the whole of his presidency, which was an undoubted success, was the military intervention in Mali. And it could well be that now with this national crisis France is currently facing, or a national disaster, possibly in the making, that Hollande has actually got a much clearer waters ahead, at least for the time being. Because
it allows him to be statesmanlike on the global stage. And yes, he probably didn't get enough credit in the West for that intervention in Mali, which was very effective. But here we have France going behind, backing US strikes. Oh, how times have changed. They didn't 10 years ago, did they?
They certainly haven't. We recall Jacques Chirac famously opposing that back in 2003. But I think, we shouldn't be over-critical of Hollande in this sense, because I think his foreign policy legacy may turn out to be quite a positive one. Certainly the intervention in northern Mali has, on the whole, I think, proved to be successful. We've seen democratic elections take place there last year. There are obviously issues that still surround that, but on the whole, I think the Mali intervention with UN backing has been well received. There was also an intervention in the Central African Republic, which is kind of ongoing, again, one of France's former colonies, and I think the intervention of French troops there has, stabilised things to some extent. And now we're moving on to the question of Iraq. 2 airstrikes in the last 7 days. It is a complete switch from a decade ago, but it may well be that Hollande is judged in future years at the end of his presidency to have been quite a coherent interventionist president in terms of the foreign policy domain. Perhaps, though, you could argue that he's doing this to shore up domestic support. But that's a kind of cynical response.
That would be slightly cynical to say that.
I don't believe that, but I think that's what is often being portrayed.
It's a side effect.
The difference between Central African Republic and Mali, we're talking about the Francophone sphere. Benedict, in Iraq, I mean, what about the French public? I guess they would probably see the connections between former French colonies, but Iraq has still got a lot of emotional baggage for French people, haven't it?
It does, but I don't think it's done out of any cynicism. I think there are a number of points very quickly to be made. One is that President Chirac, without refighting that whole war, was completely misportrayed around the world, and particularly in the British media, because there was a word that was left out of what he actually said. He said, tonight, as things stand, we will not back a UN resolution. But very conveniently, as we will find out possibly in the Iraq Inquiry Report, which at least 3 years late, whenever that appears, we see a very different situation today. And we know from a poll just a few days ago, I think it was published on Sunday morning, that the French public opinion do back this intervention and these French military intervention. Despite the terrible cost, which the French public is only too aware of, there's increased vigilance, by the way, and higher security across France. There's apparently, according to American intelligence, a real possibility that there will be terrorist attacks in the Paris metro, which is denied at the moment publicly and officially. But that is very possible. But of course, it is different, and the Mali intervention was completely timely, not seen and understood how dangerous Boko Haram was. And I will also point out that something that is bleedingly obvious, and that is that France, a year ago, under this same president, was right by the side of the Americans to intervene in Syria. And as President Hollande points out, had there been that intervention a year ago, the situation would not be the same today. And the fact is that the British know a year ago the embarrassing, humiliating and surprising defeat by only just a few votes of the British government in the British Parliament, with the Iraq war overshadowing it. But that was so stunning that it stopped President Obama in his tracks. There was that indecision, and the French were ready to go. So let's put that back in the context.
So certainly some foreign policy successes for Mr. Hollande. Owen, the main competitor, I suppose, if we call it that, Marine Le Pen. I guess the feeling here in the UK, it's still the National Front. It's known as the National Front. But how right-wing is she? Because she opposes things like globalisation and has kind of quite left-wing economic policies, some might say.
Well, actually, as one panelist said, Mrs. Le Pen has really changed the National Front, and not only in communication terms, and not only as regarding the image of the National Front. She has changed also, as you said, the economic program of the party, and she has really turned to what one could say leftist economic platform, that she is against globalization, she is against market reform, she's in favor of a big state protecting the people, which is really not what the National Front was defending in the 80s, for example. That's not going really easy in her own party. Actually, there was a meeting, a national meeting a few months ago of the direction of the National Front, and they argued together because some historic members of the direction told Marine Le Pen that they are a right-wing party and not a left-wing party because of the economic issues. But I think that Marine Le Pen is turning to the left on economic issues because she understood that's how she's going to get voters who actually come from the Communist Party and come from the left and what the French call the Front Gauche, which is a extreme left-wing party. And that's how Mrs. Le Pen is not getting voters coming from the UMP or the UDI, which are the right-wing parties. She gets voters who come from the left, people who were used to voting for the Socialist Party, for the Communist Party, and now turn to her because they think she's the one defending them against the German politics, against the American vision of the world. And that's how she won the European elections last year, and that's how she's going to win the first two senators on Sunday for the National Front, and that's how she might win two régions next year in the local elections. Today, pollsters think that she's going to win either Lille and Strasbourg or Lille and Marseille, and their regions are going to turn to the National Front. That would be a huge change in French politics.
Indeed. But Mr. Sarkozy himself knows and is posing as a unifier right now in his political comeback, so I slightly disagree with you. There are disaffected people in the UMP because of all its infighting, and indeed Mr. Sarkozy is saying one of his goals is to bring back the people who are actually defecting to the Front National.
Front National, I think, they have made progress amongst the kind of blue-collar voter that we would traditionally associate with the left and the far left. But a lot of the opinion poll data would tell us that Marine Le Pen is making headway across a kind of quite broad demographic, and it isn't just a kind of blue-collar disadvantaged vote. Yes, that works particularly well in places like northern France, but whether that would actually mean that Marine Le Pen or the Front National could take Lille as a city, I'm not sure. I mean, that is
if I may, pollsters think today that she's going to win Nord-Pas-de-Calais and PACA, which are two regions in France.
Oh, okay, Nord-Pas-de-Calais, yes, perhaps.
So in the north, in other words, of France, and also in the south east region, the Provence-Alpes-Côte d'Azur is what PACA means.
Patrick, I mean, the entire French government has resigned over bitter internal disagreements over Hollande's economic policy, but he is sticking to his guns, isn't he? He's not going to tolerate any kind of dissent.
Well, he's been forced to appoint Manuel Valls as his formerly Minister of the Interior as his Prime Minister in order to change economic policy. I'm not sure personally whether he's happy or not, but he's certainly going to stick with Valls now. This is his last chance of getting out of this mess that the country's in before the next elections. And I don't think we're going to see any change there as long as Valls can keep his majority, as I said before, keep his majority going in the National Assembly.
But is he aligning France with the sort of ideology of the German right, Benedict? I mean, France, this is new for France. This is new territory for France, isn't it?
Well, interestingly, Mr. Valls is being compared as being called for a while, actually, the kind of left-wing Sarkozy. What people are recognising in him. And it's interesting because Mr. Sarkozy was a Minister of the Interior before he became President. There are certain issues to do with crime, to do with immigration, to do with implementation of policing that appeal deeply that security side to French people. And I completely agree with Patrick, who completely rightly at the beginning of the programme underlined the fact that there was this reduced majority, which is a problem because you have inside the socialists these dissident socialists. By the way, the majority of socialists don't want President Hollande down the track to be a presidential candidate, but we'll put that aside for a second. And yes, absolutely, he's pinned his flag to the mast of Manuel Valls, and he needs this to work. And some people say, well, we know that the Prime Minister, Manuel Valls, is more popular than the President. You could say that's not very difficult. But worryingly for Manuel Valls, he's already lost 13 or 14% over the summer in the last 2 to 3 months. So it's one to watch carefully.
Nicolas, it sounds like there's agreement, at least here, that he will brazen it out till 2017. But what happens after then? I mean, I guess a lot depends on economic reform.
It is. I mean, I think it's fairly likely that Hollande will not be the candidate for the Parti Socialiste in 2017, and that's unheard of, that a sitting president doesn't get another crack at the whip. Where this is all heading in terms of a presidential election and parliamentary elections in 2017, I think, as Patrick pointed out, the one certainty that not certainty, we should never use that phrase in politics, but the one likelihood is that Marine Le Pen will get through to the second round in 2017, either against a socialist candidate or a UMP Gaullist candidate.
And she would have more of a prospect than her father did back in 2003 when he got to the second round.
She would. But remember, to win the presidency in France, you have to get a majority of votes in a head-to-head in the second round. That's 50.0 whatever % of the vote to become the president of France. I do not think that we are quite at the stage where Marine Le Pen is capable of doing that.
Watch this space. Well, many thanks. That's Nicolas Sarkozy, a lecturer in French politics at Bath University. Also here in the studio, Bénédicte Paviot, a London correspondent for France 24, and Patrick Marnham, who writes for The Spectator on France and was the former Paris correspondent of The Independent. On the line, we had Erwan Lenon, who's a business consultant and editor of Trop Libre. Thank you very much for joining me, Brendan Cole, on The Voice of Russia in London.
Corruption, money obtaining, financing of his political campaign, etc. All of, I should say, that he denies vigorously. But also, there is the small matter at a time when you have a French president who, as you correctly stated in your introduction, is beating all records of popularity or unpopularity. You would think that the right wing, the Conservatives, would do everything they can to get their ducks in a row. They haven't. They are completely split. There are at the moment, there's this incredible political infighting, backbiting, and they are at the moment being led by 3 former French prime ministers. So Sarkozy is going for it. But the principal message that the French media have retained today, I see, is the fact that he is now saying that France should go for the gaz de schiste, so for fracking, which actually he helped to pass a law while he was president, is illegal in France.
Indeed, and so he's capitalising, it sounds like, on the disarray of the Hollande presidency. Erwan, I'll turn to you. I mean, just why has it gone so wrong for Francois Hollande? 13%, it's very difficult to think of any Western leader with ratings quite so low in such a short period of time.
But I think that Francois Hollande was elected first because the French people didn't want of Sarkozy anymore, and second because he was promising that he would change the country, that it would be a new start. And actually, he's been trying his policy for 2 years, and as you said, it's been a complete failure. So in last April, he changed the prime minister and turned to Manuel Valls, who's defending a more, I would say, right-wing ideology within the socialist left, but who's actually in minority within his own party. So it's being pretty hard for him. So I think we have here the juxtaposition of 2.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. My name is Brendan Cole. Now, George Bush wasn't exactly a popular American president, but even his ratings would be the envy of France's President Francois Hollandes. His approval rating has plummeted to 13%. That's just Just over 1 in 10 French people think he is doing an adequate job. His socialist government policies have been a failure. Economic growth in the first 2 years of his presidency has been only 0.8%, and unemployment is even worse. It has swelled 15% to 3.3 million. Even his punitive tax on the super rich seemed to do little more than lead to an exodus of showbiz stars and footballers, and a less than successful European parliamentary elections ensued, his socialists winning roughly only half as many seats as the National Front. Maybe to take his mind off matters, he has undertaken a rather hawkish foreign policy. He visited Iraq this month, and interested in your view, Nicolas Sarkozy has relaunched his prospects for the presidency in 2017. Bénédicte, what did you make of what he had to say? He had a rousing rally in Lille, didn't he?
He did indeed, and it seems that what has been retained by the French media is first that he was extremely moved to be, well, almost politically alive again, if you want. It is definitely a long-awaited comeback in the sense that he's really never been out of the equation. I mean, these constant rumours, is he, won't he, etc. But what we should point out is that it seems that he has had to come back earlier than he would have wished to do. He had hoped to do this next year, and there are a number of reasons probably why he has come back now. One is that he's had a number of legal problems that are hanging around him, all kinds of accusations to do with political.
Has pledged military support to fight the Islamic State. Indeed, a tough response to Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb has signalled a no-nonsense approach that some say he hopes to draw attention away from domestic failings. Speaking of domestic matters, the country has been captivated by a less than flattering memoir by his former partner about her time as the former French First Lady. So what does this mean for the office of the French President? Can he last until his term expires in 2017? And what next for this great nation, which is seeing a resurgence in the far right as it capitalises on this vacuum left by a socialist party in disarray? Well, to discuss this, I'm joined in the studio by Patrick Marnham. He writes for The Spectator in France and was the former Paris correspondent of the Independent newspaper. Also here is Nicolas Sarkozy, a lecturer in French politics at Bath University, and Bénédicte Paviot, who is the London correspondent for France 24, the French and English versions. On the line, we have Erwan Lenon, who's a business consultant and editor of the portal Trop Libre. Warm welcome to you all. Very